You're just in time. The fire's been all cozied up, and I think it's time to settle in for some more great stories. Welcome to Cozy Horror, with me, Dr. Plague. Let's see what we've got in the old books today. I don't know how familiar many of you are with the roadhouses and honky-tonks of this great land, but it's never been my scene either. I'm more of a warm tea on the couch and in bed by 9:30 kind of guy. But sometimes when you troll the nightlife of these places, you pick up more than you bargained for. So always be a little bit wary of a dangerous smile. It all started with a trip to the bar. Some friends had invited me out after work for drinks. Given that we all work at the steel mill in this 2-stoplight rural town, that meant we were going to Dusty's. Dusty's is what's colloquially called a dive bar, but it's the only bar we have in town. It's a little roadhouse where you can drink watered-down beer, listen to country music, put some money in the jukebox, play some pool, or hit on the 7 or 8 half-dead barflies that are there every night. If you go to Dusty's for the atmosphere, then you're going to be disappointed. Most of us went there to watch the guys who worked for the town's only other reliable business, the logging company, drink too much and get in fights with people that are unprepared to stand toe-to-toe with them. That night in question was what you would call a slow night. I'd had about 3 pitchers of cheap beer, and the only fight we had seen was when someone's wife came in to drag him away from whatever tart he was talking to by the stage. Neither of them had been particularly skillful brawlers, and when they finally decided to just beat the crap out of her husband and drag him out of the parking lot, I told the guys I was going to turn in early. It was creeping up on midnight, and the bar was deader than usual. Dude, no way you're going to get a cab this late at night. You might as well stick around. Why wouldn't I be able to get a cab? Sandy's runs till 3 in the morning most nights. Charlie, the guy who had told me I wouldn't get a cab, leaned back on his stool so he could look at me. My cousin Dwayne says the cabs won't come out this far after 10 o'clock. They've been having trouble with people going missing. I rolled my eyes, walking my stool back so I didn't fall off of it. I was drunker than I thought I had been, and I didn't want to fall over in front of my friends. Yeah, I've been hearing those stories since I was a kid. Tell your cousin not to believe everything he reads on the internet. I took a staggering step towards the door, catching the bar with my hand as the room spun a little. Nah, Charlie protested. This is pretty recent. They say that the cabs have been arriving to pick up fares, but when they get there, no one is waiting. It's a big mystery, and no one's really sure what to think of it. I scoffed at him, not really in the mood for any of that. I staggered out of Dusty's, taking out my cell phone as I tried to Google the number for Sandy's. I'd used it often enough that you'd think I could remember it, but in my current state, I couldn't remember much of anything. After 2 or 3 failed attempts, I managed to get the number in and got the receptionist after 3 long rings. Sandy's Cabs, how can I help you? Yeah, I need to get a cab from Dusty's bar. I'd heard the clicking of keys on the other end of the phone, but when she learned my location, she seemed to change her mind. I'm sorry, sir, we don't pick up from Dusty's anymore. I glowered at the phone, not quite sure I had heard her right. What kind of small-town cab company doesn't pick up from the biggest bar in town? How come? I asked. It was deemed too detrimental to our clients. I guess Charlie had been right. Okay, well, where can I catch a cab? There was some furious clicking, and when she came back, she almost seemed to be whispering, as if something might hear her. There's a bus stop down by Richmond. The company has said that it's the closest to Dusty's that will pick up clients. Richmond? It's almost 5 blocks from here. Sorry, sir. If you want a cab, then that's where you'll have to go. I considered just going back inside to wait for the others, but decided I was ready to leave. A walk would probably do me some good anyway. Fine. I'll meet them there in 30 minutes. The dispatcher said that she would dispatch a cab, and then promptly hung up on me. With that out of the way, I began my walk along the shoulder of the rural road. Fortunately, the weather was pretty good for early June. The pine trees on the left side of the road, the side I was walking on, made a skittering sound in the wind, and it sent a chill down my spine. The thick swab of pulpwood trees seemed to stretch on for miles, and the farther I walked, the more it felt like something was watching me. It was little more than a tickle on the side of my face, the slight attention of something that I couldn't really see, but the farther I went, the more the regard rankled me. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was just feeling creeped out after a long walk in the middle of the night, but I heard the pine needles crunching lightly beneath something and decided to speed up. I tried to convince myself it was just a deer or a fox that I had disturbed up, and it would leave off after it got a sniff of me. They were more afraid of me than I was of them, and once they realized it, they'd take off. The farther I walked, though, the more I thought about the disappearance that Charlie had talked about. I wasn't much for news. I didn't even have a cable subscription, but I was shocked that I hadn't heard anything about these kidnappings or whatever they were. The thought that there might be something watching me from the woods with intentions of making me its next victim made me speed up a little more. I had to stop myself from running as I ate up the road. What would I do when I got to the bus stop if there was no cab there? Would I really be able to just sit in the terminal and wait while whatever was out there kept watching me? I shook the feeling off, feeling silly. It's just a raccoon or a possum or something. Just because it seemed to be going in the same direction I was didn't necessarily mean it had ill intentions. I tried to ignore the soft sound of indignant pine needles as they broke underfoot, but the farther we went, the harder it became. It was just an animal, I told myself. I had just disturbed it in whatever had brought it out tonight, and now it was curious of me. It would go on its way soon. It would leave me alone if I just ignored it. I kept telling myself that, but the further I went, the harder it was to believe. It seemed to be stalking me from behind the dark forest, a predator intent on man-flesh. It looked like some kind of hunting cat, its head boxy and its body sleek and long. It slunk quietly along behind me, plotting its attack as it prepared to spring. That was stupid, I told myself. There was nothing there. I was just making myself paranoid. I was imagining the sound of large, flat paws on pine falls. I was creating the slightly elevated breathing of the animal. If I turned now, I wouldn't see anything but the shadows and the pine trees. I tried to make my head turn, but my neck seemed unwilling. I remembered something that my grandma had said once when I was a kid, and her voice rustled through my mind like a ghost. Some things don't like being seen, and when you see them, you can't take it back. When I saw the lights of the bus stop, I almost broke into a run. I made myself walk, however, because things like that love to chase, too. As I got closer to the bus stop, I became aware of someone sitting in the lighted shell. As I got closer, I could see it was a woman, her head down and her body abnormally still. I wanted to call out to her to warn her about the thing that was following me, but as I moved closer to the stop, I realized it had broken off its chase at some point. I breathed a sigh of relief, laughing at myself for psyching myself up. It had all been in my head after all, and I had never really been in any danger. As I came into the light of the bus stop, I almost laughed, my smile hard to hide. "Something funny?" asked the woman, lifting her head to look at me. My smile soured a little. Her voice sounded strange in the bus shell, and I worried that I might have offended her. "No, it's just I was worried about something, and it appears to have all been in my head. I was mostly laughing at myself for being foolish." I realized now that I was here that she was sitting with her knees against her face, and she had leaned her head against her knees as she turned to look at me. She was a stringy thing, older teens or early 20s, and her hair looked oily as it hung about her face like filthy drapes in a rundown trailer. She was dressed in something that had once been a sack or maybe curtains, and I wondered if she might be homeless. Worst of all, she had a smell about her, a smell that was not altogether pleasant, a smell that reminded me of my grandfather's smokehouse after hunting season, of the remains of animals left behind that smokehouse. "What was it?" she asked, her teeth looking too big in her mouth as she smiled. I was afraid of being stalked by some kind of hunting cat," I said, surprising myself by speaking at all. "A cat? In this part of the world?" She scooted a little closer to me, a minute movement, but too much for me. This part of the world is more accustomed to bears, I hear," she said. As she scooted this time, I scooted away. Like I said, it was just a feeling. "What kind of feeling?" she asked, scooting again, though I couldn't figure out how. Her arms were around her legs, her knees against her cheek, and she seemed to have no means of scooting at all. It was, I stuttered, my mouth suddenly very dry. "It was like being Red Riding Hood while the wolf stalked her." At that moment, I was as sober as I had ever been. Between the creature and the girl, all the drink had been burned out of me, and I suddenly wondered if the creature might have left because it smelled her. Her smile threatened to cut her cheeks. "I imagine that was exhilarating. Did you enjoy feeling like the prey for once? Did your blood demand that you run, but your mind insisted that walking would be safer? Did you know how much I wanted to chase you?" My heart was pounding, loud enough for me to hear it. She had just admitted to being the one that was stalking me. She couldn't have been the thing in the woods. There was no way. She had been here when I arrived. There was no way she could have dogged my heels through the woods and then gotten here before me. It was impossible. My brain told me these things, but I found it harder and harder to believe as she slowly backed me into the side of the bus shell. I wanted to run, but I knew that was what she wanted too. "You thought you'd be safe once you made it to the light, didn't you, manling? Little did you know that monsters don't always shrivel in the light." She was very close now, her legs coming down as she unfurled herself. She was bigger than I had thought, her body thin and long as she pulled herself onto the bench. She was on all fours, that grin very disconcerting as it came closer. She was feral looking, some wild woman from the depths of a dark jungle. As she prepared to spring, I saw a pair of headlights pin her to the spot as they approached us. I did run then. I ran from the bench and threw myself into the cab, telling the man to drive before the door was even shut. He looked confused, turning back to the girl as if to ask if she needed a ride too, but his confusion didn't last. The color drained from his face as he got a look at her, and he yelled for me to close the door. He pulled off with a squeal of tires, and we both watched the woman as we drove away, her smiling face getting smaller as she watched us. I leaned against the seat, panting as I tried to control my galloping heart. He had to try a couple of times before I could hear him over the blood pounding in my ears. And when I finally made sense of it, we were turning around to get back on the route. "You got very lucky, fella. More lucky than you know." I asked him why I thought so, and he told me a story I'll never forget. "A couple of nights ago, I got a call to that same bus stop to pick up a fare. Dispatch said he sounded weird when he called, like he'd been running, but his car had broke down near the stop, so he figured he had just been pissed off about his luck. I pulled up about 20 minutes later and found not a middle-aged man fuming over his car, but that same girl with the Cheshire Cat grin on her face. She looked up at me as I came to stop, and I just knew that if I got out of my cab, they'd never find me again. The area near Dusty's is supposed to be off limits, and after tonight, I don't think Sandy's will be picking up out here until the situation changes. I've been sitting in my living room, hands shaking as I write this, but unsure of what to do now. I called Charlie before I got into my apartment, but I don't think they really believed me. Charlie was pretty drunk and sounded like he thought I was making fun of him. I hope they make it home safe, but it's that dangerous smile that I can't get out of my mind. She's out there somewhere, waiting for her next victim, and I feel very fortunate to be able to tell you my story and not be a squib in tomorrow's paper. Man, sure do wish we had some marshmallows and graham crackers. This would be the perfect time to open up the mouth of this old furnace and get some s'mores going. Parents are often a mixed bag. You never know quite what you're going to get when, I guess, you're born. I must have hit the lotto because my parents were always pretty good, and I'm really glad to have had them. But some parents come with strange abnormalities, let us say. You wouldn't want a dad with a hole in his head, after all. I'm not sure which was weirder, the fact that Dad had a hole in his head, or the fact that he was just so unimpressed with it. Dad had come home from his job at the steel mill, just as he had 1,000 times. We heard him sit his hard hat down by the door as he stripped out of his jumpsuit before coming to dinner. Mom had meatloaf on the table with potatoes and peas, Dad's favorite, and we waited patiently for him to arrive like we always did. If this sounds weird to you, that's because it should. Dad had a strange idea that he should go to work, Mom should stay at home and keep the kids, and that everyone should look like an episode of Leave It to Beaver when he got home. I remember for a while, Mom met him at the door with a cold glass of beer when he came home. He eventually told her to stop so that the dust from the mill didn't get on her. It was odd, but Dad paid the bills, and that's how he liked it, so that's what we did. Mom had gotten half of her welcome home greeting out before it curdled in her throat. My brother had already seen it, but I was still looking at the TV around the corner and hadn't seen it yet. MTV was playing a song by a band I liked, and I looked up at Mom to ask if I could use the bathroom when I noticed Dad's head. Dad, meanwhile, had sat down at the table like nothing was amiss, opening his napkin and putting it on his lap. He was hungry from a day at work, and he had just started asking us about our own day when he noticed our horrified looks. What? What's the matter? All three of us were speechless for a moment. How did he not realize what had us all so gobsmacked? Surely he had to feel that. He had to realize what had happened to him. There was no way that a person could be so oblivious of something like that. In the center of Dad's forehead was a hole big enough to stick your pinky finger into. It wasn't like a wound. Wounds usually bleed or appear red or scabby. This one was simply a black hole in his forehead. The edges looked a little ragged, but that more reminded me of a hole that someone had drilled into the pavement than a wound. As strange as the hole was, the fact that it didn't seem to have an exit point was even stranger. "Honey," Mom asked, trying to be diplomatic about the situation, Did something happen at work today?" "No," Dad said, looking at her speculatively. "Well, Stubbins was changing the no-slip grating on the walkways, but that's really not that weird, I guess." Are you sure nothing odd happened today?" she asked, trying to tiptoe around the matter so she didn't upset him. Sometimes Dad could have a temper, and none of us wanted to see it. "I guess, maybe," he seemed to think about it. "There was this guy I bumped into on the sidewalk. I fell down, and he helped me up, but it was nothing." When she continued to look at him skeptically, he set his fork down angrily and glowered at her. "Look, Martha, if you have something to ask, then just go ahead and ask it. I'm trying to eat here." "Dad, there's a huge hole in your freaking head." I was never what you'd call subtle. Dad wrinkled his eyebrows at me. "What in the hell are you talking about?" "There's a hole in your forehead. How do you not feel that? Are you trying to be funny? 'Cause you know I don't like jokes." Despite his gruff tone, though, he began feeling around his forehead, as if trying to find the source of discomfort. He seemed half-hearted, like he was just doing it as a favor by looking at it in the first place. But when his fingers touched the ragged edges of the hole, he shuddered a little. I didn't think it had hurt him, not really. It was more like the shudder you get when you have an itch and you scratch it. He inspected it with his fingers for a moment before getting up to look at it in the bathroom mirror. The three of us hovered just outside the door as he looked at it in the mirror, and we must have looked like some old comedy routine as we waited for his prognosis. After a few minutes of poking and prodding at it, he finally turned away and walked past us, leaving us just standing there. We found him at the kitchen table, eating his dinner like any other night. "Sit down. Your mother's meatloaf is getting cold," he told us, once he noticed we were there. "Dad," I started, but Mom put a hand on my shoulder. "Harold, there's a hole in your head. Don't you think we should go to the hospital?" Dad turned his emotionless gaze on her, making it clear that he didn't want to talk about it. When we didn't move, he growled in his throat in a deep, phlegmy way. "Doctor won't be able to do anything but poke at it and charge me an arm and a leg. Not going to no doctor. Now sit down and eat." Then he went back to eating, ignoring us until we returned to the table and ate as well. We all tried not to notice the hole as we ate, but it was hard to ignore. As we sat and watched TV that night, the TV screen seemed to reflect off that dark hole. Mom laughed every time the audience did, but Dad never did. Well, that's not entirely true. Dad did this thing when he found something funny. 1 part chuckle and 9 parts phlegmy rumble. When I was a kid, I had asked Mom once why Dad never laughed or smiled, and she told me that he laughed often and smiled daily. It's just hard to tell with your father. He's not quite as obvious about it as the rest of us are. After that, I started paying more attention to Dad, and I'd come to the point where I could pick up on the subtle twitches at the corner of his mouth, the gravelly rumble when he chuckled, the minute crinkling at the edges of his beetle-black eyes. They helped me tell when my dad was in a good mood, and when he felt less like hitting and more like patting, when you could ask him for a favor, when it was best to leave him alone. It was a talent my younger brother never learned, and it was a mistake that often earned him a cuff upside the back of the head when he'd try to hit Dad up for money. Dad was enjoying the byplay tonight as Raymond bemoaned everything from his mother to his job, but my mind was still firmly fastened on the hole. As I watched it, I almost fancied that I could see it expand and retract, as though it were breathing. I told myself it was the light from the TV, but the longer I watched, the surer I became that it was moving. It was like a ragged mouth, pulling in and pushing out air. It was subtle, like my father's moods, and the longer I watched, the more apparent it became. When my father turned his gaze on me, I realized he had caught me staring. "Either go to bed or stop staring at me. You're creeping me out." I pushed off the love seat and went to my room. I knew I wouldn't be able to focus on anything as long as that hole was on display. The next few days were uneventful, I guess, but I noticed that Dad started wearing a hat when he went outside. I wished he would wear it inside, too, because the hole seemed to always be watching me whenever I was around him. It wasn't, of course, because it didn't have any eyes, but I could feel that itchy feeling you sometimes get when someone's staring at you. It looked like it was getting bigger, too. But if it pained Dad, he didn't say anything about it. He mostly ignored it, his only exception to ignoring it being the hat he wore outside. Dad was stubborn, but he wasn't foolish. Dad was a sensible person who liked to keep attention off himself. Over the next 10 days, the hole got noticeably bigger. When we'd first seen it, it had been maybe big enough to put your pinky finger inside. Now I could have easily put several in there, and still he refused to go to the hospital. Mom tried to coax him, but he said it wasn't worth bothering a doctor over. If it was bad, it would hurt, and it doesn't. If it means to go away, it'll do it on its own. He went to work, came home, watched TV, and all the time that hole continued to grow. I found myself looking at my father more and more often, that gaping chasm seeming to look at me, even when his hat was on. I started having dreams about that hole, and in my dreams it oozed and bled, and a single eyeball rolled around to look at me. No matter what Dad was doing in the dream, that eye stared at me until I came awake, gasping. Then one day, he came to breakfast, and the hole had taken in his eyebrows. It wasn't a hole now, it was more like a pit, a crater, that just so happened to sit in the middle of my father's head. Mom was left with an egg halfway to her mouth as she stared into that gaping void. We could all see it breathing now, the push and pull of its respiration as it drew in its terrible breath. Dad sat eating his own eggs and grits, pretending like nothing was wrong, but it was clear that he felt it too. He refused to answer any of us when we called his name, and left for work with his breakfast only half eaten. I noticed that when he came home from work that day, there was a different hard hat on the table in the entryway. The hard hat had a slant to it and would better cover the hole. Dad may act like nothing was wrong, but I couldn't. I started avoiding him. I would come down to breakfast late since I knew he'd be at work. I would make excuses to stay out so I could miss dinner. I did any number of other things to avoid being in the house, but it hardly seemed to matter. I had begun to hear some kind of strange whispering as I lay in bed at night, and it permeated my dreams as the eye inside began to whisper words I didn't understand. The words were alien, harsh, and unwantable, but I felt I knew their meaning. My sleep became as ragged as my father's moods, and if I hadn't been barely into my senior year of high school, I think I would have moved out. Then about a month and a half after the spot appeared, Dad didn't come down for breakfast. Mom told us that Dad wasn't feeling well. She said he must have gotten sick in the night, but the way her eyes looked told me something beyond sickness was at play. He didn't go to work that day, and unknown to us, he would never go back to work again. Mom moved into the guest bedroom, and I wouldn't find out till later it was because Dad had locked the door and wouldn't let her in. We could hear him in there bumping around. Mom would leave food in the hallway, but we never saw him take it. This went on until one morning when I forgot my notebook upstairs. I'd been heading to school, leafing through my bag, when I realized I'd forgotten my biology notebook. I had a test that day, and I wanted to study before class. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard the door to my parents' bedroom open. I stopped halfway up, not sure whether I should continue or not. None of us had seen Dad since he went into hiding, and my brother and I had been very curious about what was happening with the hole. I put my fingers on the carpet and scrambled slowly up the stairs, peeking over the edge of the stairs as I heard the scrape of silverware being bumped. I could see my father's back, clad in a bathrobe and knee socks, as he bent over for the day's breakfast tray that my mom had left for him. He seemed to be having trouble grabbing it, and his hands threatened to knock over the juice that she had set beside the bowl of oatmeal. Then he stood up, and I had to put my hand over my mouth as he came into view. The top of his head looked like nothing so much as one of those cartoon holes they used to trap each other. It was a swirling black vortex that looked a mile deep, and as he turned to go back into the room, I could see the hole was like some kind of optical illusion. It was exactly as deep on the other side as it was on the back. He turned and took the tray back into the bedroom, but when he bumped the tray on the corner of the door, I realized why we had heard him banging around so much the last few days. In my dream, the hole always had an eye, but in reality, it had stolen my father's sight. The dreams became different after that. Every night I dreamed that my family was eating around the breakfast table. My brother sat on my left, my mom sat on my right. Dad sat across from me, bent over his breakfast as usual. They all sat eating food from a massive pile, their breakfast more like a buffet. I seemed to be the only one paying attention to the strange creature wearing father's clothes, and the food he ate was pushed into the circle hole atop his head. As I watched, the eye emerged again, but it wasn't alone this time. The eye was in a face, and the face was long and terrible. The skin was tan and leathery, like a hide left out in the sun too long. The hair was white and fine like a corpse's. The teeth were jagged and yellow, its eyes the cataract threads of the chronically blind, and when its face rolled around to look at me, I would shake as its lips rose in an almost comical grin. As everyone ate, the mouth opened, and a low whisper began to assault my ears. Every night, that whisper became a little louder, and over time, I came to understand the words, "Shally shally may ray, fori fori may gra, lee raleigh grega, su raleigh drema." The words slid into my ears like slugs, coating my brain in the forbidden knowledge they possessed. I wasn't sure what the dream meant, but I knew that they were meant for me. Was this the thing that had been staring at me the whole time? Was this the reason I had felt watched? As the dreams continued, I began humming or reciting the words it spoke to myself during the day. I would catch myself making little rhymes out of it, and they were never far from my mind. It was almost soothing to speak those words, a balm to the terrible dreams and the terrible fear that wormed its way through my mind. I knew what it wanted me to do, and one night, I did my part. I needed to use the bathroom in the middle of the night, my bladder full to bursting. I was leaving the bathroom when I noticed that the door to my parents' room was open for the first time in a long time. There was a noise coming from inside, and it sounded pained. I thought maybe one of the dogs had gotten in there and gotten hurt, but I think even then, I knew what I would find. Dad was on the ground, his swirling head practically hyperventilating as it pulled in and out. The swirls had taken in Dad's shoulders and the top of his chest. He was lying on the floor, flopping around as his arms protruded from the vortex. I reached down and helped him sit with his back to the bed. He couldn't talk, probably couldn't even see, but he seemed to understand that I was there to help him. As I looked at the swirling mass, though, I felt the words come to my lips. I don't know if they were intentional, but I know they were the words that needed to be said. Shali Shali Rayma, Fori Fori Megra, Li Raleigh Grega, Su Raleigh Drema. As the words fell from me, I saw something swirling in the mass of shadows. I was worried it would be the huge eye, like the one I'd seen in my dreams, but I was even more afraid that it would be the ancient face that I often saw amidst the vortex. As it swirled and thrummed, I could see the white hair beginning to sprout from the depths. The head was coming on fast, and as those eyes emerged from the depths, I could see the corners cast up in a smile. My shaky legs took me away from him with small, stuttery steps. His face came free of the murk, but it wasn't done yet. As his head slid free, a withered form emerged beneath it. He was naked, looking like some kind of wizened mummy, as his leathery skin slid from the dark pool. Below the dark pit that had made up my father's head, his body began to shrivel up like a 4th of July firework, becoming blackened embers before my eyes. The more of that evil thing that came free, the less of him there was, and when his withered feet touched down on the soft carpet of my parents' bedroom, what remained of my father simply blew away. The old man reached down for the grubby bathrobe that Dad had been wearing, and tittered as he pulled it around himself.
Took you long enough, but I guess I can't be upset. You and your father have served me well, though you never realized you were doing it. Your reward is not sharing in his fate. Your punishment is knowing you are responsible for my return to this world. What you do with these gifts is up to you.
Then he left, just walked out of our house and into the night. As the sun comes up over my mother's kitchen, I realize I've been writing this since I managed to get back to my feet and walk shakily down the stairs. I've been trying to write down as much of this experience as possible so I won't forget any of it, but it's so weird, and it's hard to put it all into words. What the hell was that thing that ultimately killed my father? Did it make the hole in his head? Why him? As I sit here watching the sun come up, I realize I may never know. Speaking of things to roast over an open fire, I really like this next story, and I think you will too. My uncle always told us not to play in his cornfield. I think he was more worried about us coming down on a copperhead or maybe on a hornet's nest, but no matter what creepy crawlies inhabit your cornfield, you should always look out for one in particular. You wouldn't want to run afoul of the Corn Man, would you? I remember it like it was yesterday. My mom was at work, and my brother Daryl was watching me. Daryl was older than me, about 6 years, and he was kind of a jerk. Our dad had left right after I was born, and Mom had to work 2 jobs to keep us fed and clothed and keep the lights on and the roof over our heads. Maybe Daryl blamed me for Dad leaving, and that's why he was usually so mean to me. He was never violent, though I got the feeling he wanted to be sometimes, but he always teased me. He told me there were monsters in the basement who would eat me, and told me there were ghosts in the attic, that the boogeyman would come and carry me off some night, about all the perverts who would just scoop me up off the street someday and do stuff I didn't really understand at the time. He liked to scare me, and I think that's how we got on the subject of the Corn Man. It happened one afternoon when we were playing hide and seek. Daryl rarely played with me, not unless Mom made him, and he was being slow about counting, just trying to wait for Mom to go to work so we could go back inside and keep watching TV like he wanted to. He was counting, and I was hiding out in the cornfield where I knew he wouldn't find me. As he finished, he stepped out into the field, knowing that's where I was. He started looking, cursing, and stomping around as he couldn't find me, and seemed to be getting pretty frustrated. Finally, he said the words I will never forget. "Better come out, turd, before the corn man gets ya." I stood up. He had been pretty close to finding me, and asking who the corn man was. Daryl smiled wickedly, seeing another opportunity to scare me, and get himself back inside as well. The corn man, he told me, lived in the cornfields that seemed to perpetually surround our house. The field was filled with corn during this time of year, and Daryl said that the corn man patrolled it and got little kids who went out to play in the field. He said that the corn man couldn't see you if you stayed still. If you just stood like a statue, not moving an inch, he wouldn't see you, and he'd think you were just another stalk of corn. I told him not to lie, but he said it was true, and said we should get back inside before the corn man caught us in the field. We were both in the living room, Daryl gripping the remote and flipping through the channels, as Mom said goodbye and left for the night. He had spent that week tormenting me with stories about the corn man that were usually just ways for him to get out of stuff. "Corn man will come into your house if he smells garbage. Better take it out before he smells it." I heard corn man comes to take away messy kids. "You better clean up around here." "Oh, you're going to tell Mom, huh? Well, the corn man loves to eat little tattletales, so go ahead and tell Mom you saw me smoking. I hope I'm awake when he comes to get you." That night, however, he just grinned as someone knocked on the door. He told me to go get it, and I prickled a little. I didn't want to go out after dark. Not after what he had told me about the corn man mainly hunting at night, and usually for kids who were out past curfew. He pushed me with his boot as I dithered, and I stumbled to the door as someone pounded on it again. My hands shook as I reached out, turning the knob slowly as I pulled it open. I sighed happily, though, happy to see Reggie and Clyde for the first time in my life. Reggie and Clyde had been Daryl's friends since elementary school. Mark was usually with them as well, but I supposed he must be off doing something else. They were often involved in Daryl's shenanigans, and I kinda hated seeing them come around. Tonight, though, I was just glad they weren't the corn man. I turned to tell Daryl that his friends were here, but he was already heading for the door, pulling on his leather jacket. He told me he was going out, and I asked where he was going after dark. "Not that it's any of your business, but we're going to go summon the corn man so he'll give us a wish." I felt my mouth slip open and asked why he would do that. "Well, in the story, if you can complete his challenge, then he grants you a wish. But," he said, turning back towards the door, "you'd better stay here. You'd probably be too scared to come out into the cornfield after dark." I agreed with him until I realized that meant I'd be home alone all night, but by myself. I had grabbed my coat and ran after the three of them before I could think better of it. The three of them were standing by the cornfield, cigarettes winking on and off as I approached. Clyde elbowed Daryl and pointed at me. Daryl grinned the widest I'd ever seen him grin, and the effect was pretty terrifying. He looked like a ghoul from a zombie movie in the cigarette light. Maybe even one of those pedophiles he was always telling me would get me. "Well, well, well, look who decided to join us. You trying to get a wish too, turd?" No, I said, snuffling a little in a mixture of fear and mucus. "I just didn't want to be at home alone." What are you talking about? You never said you got wishes from the corn man." Daryl took a long drag off his smoke, the light making his face look like a jack-o'-lantern. "Well, the word is that if you stand in the field and say the magic words, the corn man will come and test you. If you can stand as still as a cornstalk, not moving and not being caught, he'll grant you one wish. But if he catches you, your blood will water his cornfield. So, sound like something you want to do, turd?" I shook my head nervously, the wind rustling the corn and making me shudder. I didn't want to go out there, but I didn't want to stay here in the dark alone either. He snorted at me and rolled his eyes, pitching his cigarette away from the dry cornfield. "Well then, go home if you're going to be a baby. The rest of us will get our wishes, and you'll just be home, pissing your pants." I shook my head again, and he must have taken it for acquiescence. "Then come on, or don't. I don't really care." They set off into the thick cornfield, and I followed after them. The sea of stalks whipped past me as the 3 bigger boys walked in front of me. It was dark, the night birds and the sound of animals tuning up all around us. I was shivering, and it had nothing to do with the night or the chill in the air. I was scared, terrified even, and the jostling boys laughed and whispered to each other as they walked towards the center of the vast cornfield. When the corn surrounded us, we stopped, and Daryl turned to look at us. Okay, so now we chant the special chant to summon him. They stood in a triangle, looking at me, and I moved up to make it a diamond. Corn man, come to me if you can. Corn man, I can stand as the corn stalks can. Corn man, still as stone, not like a man. Corn man, still and quiet as the corn stalks can. He looked at us as he finished and told us to chant with him. As we raised our voices to the sky, I began to slur my words as my teeth chattered. I was terrified, standing in the cornfield that had been the setting of so many nightmares, and listening as we summoned the creature that had stalked me through those hated fields. Why had I come with them? Would I really have been less safe at home? Wouldn't I have been fine as long as I stayed inside? I heard my brother's words as he told me about how the corn man came after kids who were alone. They drifted through my mind as I felt myself start to cry. I chanted the words to summon the corn man along with the rest of them, tears streaming down my face as the fear took hold. When we heard the rustling, Daryl told us to be quiet. All right, stand still so he can't see you. If you move, he'll catch you, and then you'll be dead. All 4 of us stood as still as we could, the corn rustling as something came towards our location. I hoped that maybe it was the farmer that owned the land. He was a nice guy, but he didn't like people playing in his cornfield after dark. If not him, then I hoped it was some of the teenagers he usually kicked out of the field. Let it be anyone but the shadowy monster that was the corn man. He was like a scarecrow with corn stalks for hands and a mouthful of black teeth in my dreams. He would grow very high on his cornstalk legs, and he was faster than anything ever, even Jason or Michael Myers. As we stood in the field like idiots, I saw the sack head of a scarecrow come through the stalks and had to stifle a scream. He was wearing overalls and a straw hat, his face a sack with grease paint, and he was lumbering up out of the corn shakily. He had normal hands, but one of them was holding a scythe and the other was holding a hatchet. As he came stomping out of the corn, I held as still as possible, not moving a single muscle. He was real. He was actually real. In my mind, I had believed in him. Of course I had, but I had hoped that he wasn't really real. It's hard to explain, but some rational part of my mind knew that it was all just a goof my brother had come up with to scare me. Now I was forced to cower as we watched this terror hunt through the field for us. He moved like a wraith, silent and sure, except for the crunch of old corn husks. He smacked at the stalks with his scythe sometimes, and I had to stop my teeth from chattering as he turned to finally look at my hiding place. Until then, he had lumbered around like one of those adults that's only pretending to look for you. I felt like he knew where we were. He was choosing not to find us, and now the game was up. I moved my eyes around, not daring to turn my head, but I couldn't see my brother or his friends anywhere. Had they made a break for it? This was their idea, after all. Why would they run? Had the corn man gotten them? No, I would have heard that. They had abandoned me. Daryl had finally gotten tired of having me around and decided to have the corn man do his dirty work for him. Mom and the police would search for me, but they'd never find my body. I would water the corn forever. As my eyes rolled around looking for them, the sack head turned towards me, and the creature started stalking in my direction. I was speechless, utterly terrified, and as I stood like a statue, I felt a warm stream of urine run down my leg as the cloth hood came within inches of my face. I could hear his raspy breath beneath it, smell the air as he stared down, and I found myself wishing he would just get it over with already. We stared at each other for a count of 20 before the corn man blew out a raspberry of barely contained laughter and let his weapons drop to the ground. "Are you kidding me? Daryl, your brother pissed his pants!" All three of them came out of the tall cornfield then, laughing like donkeys. The mask came off to reveal Mark's stupid, sweaty face as he guffawed at me. They surrounded me like a pack of jackals, and all pointed to the piss stain on my pants and the liquid running down into the dirt. I felt the tears falling again, but my body was still locked in a rictus of terror. Daryl had tricked me. He'd tricked me again. He had terrified me and humiliated me, and now I would have to walk back home with cold, wet pants as my brother and his friends laughed at me. I wanted to run away, but my legs weren't quite ready to spirit me away just yet. That's probably the only reason I'm still alive. I saw Mark jerk suddenly, the smile dribbling off his face as something squelched from his stomach. It spattered across my brother and his friends, though they noticed it too late. I, however, couldn't help but miss it as it pattered across my face and chest. It was blood, thick and red, and they turned as a horror strode from the field of lush cornstalks. My mind hadn't done him justice. The corn man, or whatever he was, looked more like a terrible husk doll that you sometimes see at the farmer's market when Mom took us. It appeared to be woven together from corn husks and corn stalks and the silk tops of the plants. It was dirt and leaves and corn cobs and live plants. Its entire body seemed to move like a living vine. It moved with a complete form, its entire being, and it waded into Daryl and his friends like a force of nature. Clyde had turned to look at what had wetted him, and I saw that twisted gnarl of root and cornstalks slam into the side of his head. His neck audibly broke, bones poking out from his collar as he fell sideways into the corn. Daryl screamed, Kyle cursed loudly, and I stood rooted in fear as the corn man went about his work. "No way!" Daryl yelled, stepping back as he turned to face the creature. "No friggin' way!" "It's real?" Kyle asked. The creature momentarily stalled as it looked at them speculatively. No, I made it up. I made the whole thing up. It can't be real. It can't be real. It can't be..." He died with that negation on his lips. The corn man extended his thick, rooted arm, and it grew as it coursed towards Daryl's head. Daryl's screams were cut off as the root covered his face, his throat bulging as it poured its roots and stalks down his throat. I could see his body twitching, his limbs convulsing as the corn man pumped his roots into him. My cheeks were wet again, my terror-fueled tears streaming down my face as Kyle made a run for it. He disappeared into the corn, just in time to miss the fate of his friend. Daryl's body erupted in a spray of corn stalks as they burst from him in a red spray of arterial blood. He crumpled, very dead, as his form was shredded. He lay in pieces, his body watering the corn just as he had said. I was resprayed with blood, this time being washed in the deluge, but I was still frozen with fear. My body had hit that point where it was numb, too scared to move, and as the corn man stalked in, I could hear my ragged breathing intensifying. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just knew that this was the time when my own blood would water the cornfields, just like Daryl's. He stood face to face with me, much like Mark had when he was pretending, and as the seconds spread out, I felt like my heart must surely stop, and I would die of fear. Then, to my amazement, the corn man spoke. "You have passed my test. You truly can do as the cornstalks can, and have earned a boon of me. What do you desire of the corn man?" I was speechless, my body unmoving, as I continued to stand like a statue before this hulking horror. His voice sounded like the whispering of wind through the cornstalks, and if I hadn't been frozen in fear, I would have shuddered out of my skin as his words hit me. He loomed over me, his body bathed in the blood of my brother and his friends, and I was left to shudder and shake as he stared at me. He cocked his head, his roots making a strange creaking noise as he studied me in my fear.
Come now. There must be something you desire. Why else would you brave your death at the hands of the Corn Man, if not for a boon?
I looked up at him. Even hunkered down, he was taller than me, and my eyes streamed with tears, my body unable to move.
Very well. Know then that the Corn Man owes thee a boon, a favor as your people say, and he will be back to collect in time. Think well over your wishes, that my debt may be paid.
Then he lumbered off after Kyle, his steps groaning as he moved, and I was left standing amidst the stalks. That's where they found me the next day. That's where they found me and what was left of Daryl, Mark, and Clyde. I was catatonic for days. I had remained still as a stone in the field all night, not daring to move as the fear held sway over me. Even when they called out to me, I couldn't answer them. My legs ached. My body cried out for rest, but my legs refused to unlock. My mother's arms were warm as they wrapped around me. I was cold, hungry, my throat like a desert, but I couldn't move or speak. They kept me in the hospital for weeks, trying to figure out what had happened to me. The police questioned me ceaselessly, being covered in my brother's blood like I was, but my mother ended every interview by telling them that it was pointless to question me. They assumed that I had watched the 4 boys being murdered, Kyle's remains found further out in the field, and I had been traumatized by the events. I stayed like that for almost 3 weeks, before waking up one day to find my arms and legs were ready to obey me again. The police came back to question me, but I told them that I had blacked the whole thing out, not wanting to ever speak of the horrible things that had happened in that field. I only tell you here, a decade later, to come to terms with what happened to me and try to put it behind me. That, and see if anyone else knows of the Corn Man and his ways. You see, he's come back over the years to collect on his favor. I still live with my mother, my body locking up sometimes when the fear takes over. Once a year, on the anniversary of my brother's death, he comes to ask if I'm ready to take his boon. Sometimes he appears in my room at night, sometimes outside my window, but he always speaks in that strange voice and asks if I'm ready to accept my favor. Every time I remain still, my body seizing up and my jaw locking, and every time he goes away. I've gotten better at getting myself under control again. Last time I was only frozen for an hour, but I've had to go back to the hospital over the years when the catatonia reemerges. One day, I will be able to ask for something, so I never have to see him again. Until then, I suppose I'll be haunted by the visage of the Corn Man. Fire's really getting warm. Might have to take my socks off and put my toes up against the furnace here in a minute. And those are some dogs you definitely don't want to hear barking. We've all got some strange things in our Amazon shopping list, I'm sure. No need to send me links. I believe you. But when you're purchasing things, it's always best to read reviews, maybe do a little bit of research. You wouldn't want to find out what the colors of fear are all about. When I came home from work and saw the package on the front porch, I was filled with an irrational flood of joy. You would have thought I'd received something spectacular, and to me, I had. I'd been waiting for 5 days for Amazon to send the package, and as I brought it inside and cut the tape, I couldn't wait to see how it looked. Reaching into the buffer pads, I pulled out not a game or a new Funko Pop, but a single light bulb in a package that seemed bigger than it should have needed to be. Not just any light bulb, however, but one of those color-changing LED light bulbs. I'd seen them on TikTok and thought they looked cool. They would go through a whole spectrum of colors, thanks to the little remote they came with, and I thought the whole operation looked very soothing. I like to watch people lay in bed as the colors shifted, and I thought it might help with my recent mood. I'd been experiencing some heavy seasonal depression lately, and the inclusion of some colored lights might be just what I was missing. I read the instructions and installed the bulb in my ceiling fan and smiled as I looked at the little remote in my hand. There were so many colors to choose from, and I felt a giddy sense of anticipation. Which one should I try first? Red? Maybe blue? I settled on a light and buttery yellow as I lay in my bed. I felt like I was in some kind of sun, the ones I'd drawn as a kid, it seemed. The yellows were thick, the shade of melted crayons, and I was happy as I lay beneath it in my single room. It had been hard to get out in the cold lately, and this made me feel like I was at the park, under the warm sun at the beach, maybe. It wasn't actually warm, but I could trick my mind into thinking that it was, at least. I lay there for a few minutes, just soaking up the faint sunlight before I got up and went to my computer. As I logged into World of Warcraft for a little gaming, I looked at the remote and decided on a different color. As I explored in the game, I changed the colors to depend on where I was going. The rusty red of Orgrimmar, the deep green of Stranglethorn, the light blue of the Undercity, back to the sunny yellow for the Barrens, and so on and so on. The bulb had a color for every occasion, it seemed, and I really enjoyed playing with it as the evening progressed. I fell asleep that night under the soft, dark blue of a night sky, and I slept better than I had in a long time. In my downtime the following week, I found myself playing with the light, trying out the different colors. I discovered a button for mixing colors and found myself making color combinations that turned my room into all kinds of different shades. I found I liked a few of them. The blue and green combination reminded me of the undersea videos I'd seen on Discovery Channel when I was a kid. There was a red and yellow of the deep desert, the purple-blue of icy peaks, and I found myself lying in bed some evenings after work and just trying different combinations. I fell asleep on Thursday night, the soft blue and deep purple making me think of glaciers, and woke up to a nightmare. I opened my eyes and found myself floating in a room that looked smeared with blood. The walls seemed to hold strange shadows, the reds and blacks mingling like filth in a morgue. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst were the creatures. They were dirty white that was almost translucent, their eyes like lamps as they stared at my prone form. I wasn't sure what to make of them at first, and I wondered if I was dreaming. If I was, this was the most realistic dream I had ever had. Their bodies were long and narrow, like pale reeds, and other than their eyes, they seemed devoid of features. There were two of them, one in the corner by my desk and the other perched in the junction of the ceiling and wall. We stared at each other for some undeterminable amount of time, and I was nearly convinced that I was actually dreaming when my phone chirped and lit up on the nightstand. All three of us looked at the light, and when I looked back at them, the one in the corner of the ceiling had dropped soundlessly onto the floor. The skin around the bottom of his head seemed to rip open to reveal a double row of buttery yellow teeth. His fellow creature did the same, and as the two stalked closer to me on their noodly-looking arms, I whimpered and reached for the bat that I kept beside my bed. As I turned, I must have rolled over on the remote. As the bulb changed back to the same buttery yellow I had basked in on the first day, I came up with the bat out in front of me to find the room devoid of nightmare creatures. I turned it back to the normal fluorescence and looked around in a panic, trying to figure out what had just happened. I was still awake when the sunrise lit the windows, and I wasn't sure I'd ever sleep again with the image of those creatures thumping around in my head. I tried to get about my morning routine, getting ready for work and getting breakfast together, but the image of those horrible things would never leave me. They followed me through my day, dogging my steps as I tried to get my work done, but by lunch, I was a mess. When my boss saw me in the break room, my shaking hands struggling to open my lunch bag, she told me I looked ill and said I should go home and get some rest. "You look ill, dear. take the day off and have a good weekend. We'll see you Monday." I told her that wasn't necessary, but she insisted. I was grateful for the chance to get some rest, but I found my anxiety growing as I got home, the same place I had seen those horrors. I checked the corners where I had seen them, hoping to find some sign that it had just been a dream, and I was rewarded with nothing. There were no marks on the eggshell white walls, no signs of claws or dirt from the filthy skin of the creatures, but it did little to soothe me. Sign or not, I knew I hadn't been dreaming, and that meant that these things had to be real. The idea that I couldn't see them, that they only existed in the dark, was even more terrifying. But despite my fears, the need to find out what they were and how they had disappeared without any sign just wouldn't leave me. I started by just turning off the lights, but I didn't think that would do much good. I'd woken up in the dark plenty of times, and I'd never seen anything like those creatures. No, I thought, it had to have something to do with that light that I had seen covering the walls. It had changed when I rolled onto the remote, and whatever combination I had bumped had allowed me to see the creatures. I knew about things that you couldn't see with the naked eye, things that were too small or hard to see outside the right color spectrum, and I wondered if these creatures were like that. More importantly, if I could only see them in that spectrum, then was it a two-way street? Could they only see me when that spectrum was on? Might explain why they didn't attack me otherwise. I didn't want to see them. The thought of looking at them terrified me, but I was curious as well. The thought of them followed me as surely as the creatures might, and I needed to be sure of what they were. I was no scientist, not by a long shot, but my desire for answers was greater than my self-preservation in this case. I started playing with different color combinations on the remote, my bat always at the ready. Before you ask, I tried red and black, but gave me something like a desert cave more than anything. The remote was small, but if you held the buttons, the colors would change further. They would get darker or lighter. They might even change depth and perception, and the combinations really were vast. My computer sat untouched that weekend, my books and TV left to catch dust, and by Sunday, I was a mess. Hadn't slept much that weekend. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see were the faces of the monsters that stalked me, and my rest was pretty thin. When someone knocked on my door, I jumped and looked around fitfully. I peeked down the hallway as someone knocked again, and when Debbie called my name, I realized it wasn't the monsters trying to trick me out of my little cocoon. I didn't even realize I wasn't dressed for company until I made it to the door. I was in clothes that my mother would have called grubs, and my hair was loose and unwashed. I likely smelled. I hadn't showered since Friday morning, and was extremely self-conscious as I opened the door to my apartment. Debbie smiled, bundled up against the cold, and when she saw the state of me, she came right in and asked what was wrong. "Wendy said you had been sent home on Friday with some kind of illness, and I see why now. You look terrible. It's not the COVID, is it?" she said, pulling her scarf up over her nose and mouth. "No, I'm not actually sick," I admitted. "Then what's going on? Have you been sleeping okay? Here." She took egg drop soup out of a bag and set it on the couch. "I brought you your favorite sick soup to help you get past this." I smiled, realizing that I hadn't eaten since the night before, when that delicious steam hit my nose. Bless her. Debbie was a true friend. As we sat, Debbie had brought dumplings to go along with the soup. I told her about the weird creatures that I had seen. Unlike me, Debbie looked excited at the prospect of seeing something different. Debbie was into things like ghost hunting and cryptids, and she loved the idea of actually getting to see one. "Oh my gosh, you gotta let me help. Come on, we'll have a picnic in your room. if this is making you sick, I want to help you see it through." I was glad for her help, but I didn't want to get her caught up in the same crap I was likely getting caught up in. Debbie was my best friend, and the thought of the creature getting her too, all thanks to my damn curiosity, was something I would rather avoid. Debbie, however, was not taking no for an answer. We took the food to my room, and I showed her the remote and the bulb. Debbie scratched her chin as she looked at the buttons, asking if I was sure it was red and black, as she started working through the settings. When I woke up, it was definitely red and black, but it was different. It was greasy looking, ethereal, not quite real. It was like a dream. That's why it took me so long to realize I was awake. Debbie started changing the colors in quick succession, the colors dancing as they went through the spectrum. I was afraid she would burn it out, the colors changing too quickly for my liking, but she just shook her head at me. She said it was fine. They were meant to sustain these kinds of things, and it would speed it up if she just kept flipping through. So we sat there, eating and flipping the lights at an almost nauseating pace for the next few hours. The sun went down and the moon came up, and as I lay on the bed and played on my phone, I realized it was almost midnight suddenly. I had to go back to work the next day, and I told Debbie I needed to get to bed. "Look, I appreciate your help, but I've got to be up early in the morning." Just a little more," Debbie said, the lights still dancing by. I know I can do it." I rolled over and shook my head, reaching for the remote. "Look, I appreciate your help, but I just don't think it can be done." She moved a little away, still flipping through the colors as I reached, and as I came off the bed, she scuttled a little further back. "Come on, just a little longer. You can be a little tired tomorrow in exchange for a good night's sleep, right?" "No, Debbie, I'm tired. I need to..." I grabbed the remote, Debbie pulling back, and that's when it fell over us. I don't know how, but we were both suddenly enveloped in the aura of dirty red and black light. The walls oozed like fresh blood. The dark hung around them like smog, and I was suddenly aware that we weren't alone. There were more than two this time, their numbers nearly a dozen, as they clung to the walls and the ceiling, like grisly insects. Debbie's mouth hung open, her scream stuck midway up her throat, and I realized this had likely not been what she was expecting. As their mouths split their faces, their teeth huge, my hands shook and my stomach dropped. They fell on us then, and I rolled under the bed without thinking. Debbie's scream came out, loud and strong, and I pulled my knees to my chest as I tried to think about what to do. They were killing her. They were killing my best friend, and the only thing I could think of was changing the lights back. It had worked the first time. Maybe it would work now. I looked around, finding the remote on the ground, but as I reached for it, I saw the giant yellow eyes find me. One of those noodly arms came reaching for me, and as my fingers found the plastic face, I pushed the first button I could find and snatched it away from the sharp teeth of the creature. The light turned to something like normal before it popped loudly, and I was left in darkness. I got out my phone and switched on the flashlight, looking around and finding nothing but the ruined remains of our picnic. By the light of my phone, I discovered that the creatures were gone, but I also discovered that Debbie was gone, too. I've ordered another light bulb, but it won't arrive until tomorrow. I paid for express shipping, but I don't know if that'll be soon enough to save Debbie. I don't want to see those things ever again, but if there's a chance that Debbie's still alive, I have to find her. She wanted to help me, and now it's my turn to try and help her. So be careful with your new light bulbs if you buy one. You may see more than you bargained for, and you may lose more than just the cost of shipping. I think we've got time for one more story, while the fire's still hot and the couch is still oh so comfortable. Maladies are never fun, whether it's a common cold or the big C. We all have our crosses to bear, and we all have our maladies to manage, don't we? But when you hear about a treatment that sounds a little too good to be true, you should always be a little bit wary. It may come as cold comfort. Well, Miss Lee, this treatment is experimental, but we feel it will improve your condition. All you need to do is sign on the dotted line, and we can schedule you for the first of the week. The doctor tapped the form like a used car salesman trying to sell a sports car with no engine. The kind of salesman who thinks you're too stupid to look under the hood and too desperate to believe the deal is anything but genuine. That was the beginning of the end of my life. My name is Pandora Lee, and this is my story. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with a debilitating bone disease, the kind that causes your bones to be very weak. My doctor sent me to a specialist, and after running some tests and running up a small fortune in bills, he wanted to try an experimental treatment to harden my bones. I was hesitant. Who wouldn't be? But could I really afford to be in my condition? The following week, I arrived for my first treatment. The waiting room was the same bland area I'd seen 1,000 times. The sort of forgettable facade that hides the work that goes on beyond that unassuming blue door, between the show floor and the butcher's shop. Children moved beads along a wire maze as parents and patients looked through magazines that had been current about 10 years ago. The smiling face of President Obama looked up from a table, he and Martha Stewart sharing space with Better Homes and Gardens and Highlights magazine. The magazines were only slightly more interesting than the paperwork on the clipboard I was muddling through, but I tried my best to ignore them. "Miss Lee, we're ready for you," a young blonde-haired woman in scrubs called to me, smiling brightly as she led me through the oddly dark blue door and into a hallway of the same color. Despite the buzzing overhead lights, the paint scheme made the whole place look shadowy, and I shuddered as she led me to a little room farther down. She showed me to a small, sterile room, with only a gurney and an IV stand to break up the emptiness. The room was blessedly brighter, a kind of eggshell white that verged on eye-watering, and I stepped inside and handed her the clipboard. "Please take a seat and get comfortable, Miss Lee. The doctor will be here very shortly." As I lay there waiting, the clean white paper crinkling under me, I had a gut feeling that this was a bad idea. I chalked it up to nerves, though. It was just another exam, just another series of tests, just another meeting that would end predictably. I should have listened to my gut. As the doctor walked in, he smiled his best Crest Kid smile, and I imagined I could see spit stains on his teeth. I wish I could tell you that he was an ugly little man, some goblin who scared me or made me wish a nurse had stayed to observe our interactions, but he was actually very plain-looking. Thinking back now, I can't tell you anything about him, other than his big grin and his neat little mustache. It might have been easier if he were a monster, but I guess life is rarely easy. "Well, Miss Lee, as you know, this is still experimental. It's in the early trial phases. You'd honestly be one of our first human trials for the treatment, but we feel you are the perfect candidate." I stared at him blankly, unsure whether he expected me to be flattered or break out into applause. He looked uncomfortable, clearly not getting the response he was expecting. Calling the pretty blonde nurse from earlier, he asked her to strap me down and told me to relax. The straps were scratchy, the clasps sitting cold against my arm, and I found it hard not to squirm as she slid the IV in. The doctor reached into the hall and wheeled out a large metal canister. It looked like a fire extinguisher, the old kind with a hand crank, except for the face mask on the end, which is undoubtedly going over my face. He must have noticed my apprehension, because the too big grin made a return appearance. "Don't worry, Miss Lee. It's all very safe." He placed the mask over my face, the smell of cleaner mixing with something sickly sweet and acidic. "Breathe deep," he prompted, and I took my first breath his voice sounding as if it were coming to me from the lip of a deep hole. "You'll wake up in no time." Then it all went black, my last memory being the stuff I breathed in tasting like the smell of cleaner my mother had always used when I was young. Then I didn't think about anything for a while. I was floating for a while, my body as light as a feather, and I could have gladly floated in that void forever. When I dropped back into my body, however, it was worse than any falling dream I'd ever had. I opened my eyes and looked around frantically, my body still splayed across the gurney as the canister pumped whatever was in the tank into my lungs. I felt a surge of pain rip through my whole body, and I jerked fitfully against the restraints. The scream ripped up my lungs, the gas clouding my mouth as I choked on my anguish. The nurse ran in, trying to calm me to no avail. "Calm down, Miss Lee. We don't want you to damage your bones while the treatment is doing its job. The pain is only temporary. The doctor will be in to give you something for it and explain everything." Her words did nothing for the pain that drilled into my bones, and after what seemed like hours, the doctor finally came in. He had a needle in his hand. The tip slid easily into the IV, and he filled the saline bag with something. It was cold, the liquid flowing in like ice, but the relief was immediate. I lay back gasping, the sudden lack of pain almost as jarring as the pain had been, and the big smile hovered over me like a specter. "The first treatment is always the most painful, but it seems to be a success so far. You might have some joint stiffness for a few days, but that's to be expected, as the treatment hardens your bones." As the gas hissed and the ice brought sweet relief to my inflamed bones, I lay there drinking in grateful lungs of air. The lack of pain was hard to quantify, but I became aware over time that it wasn't just the sudden burning that had gone away. The everyday pain I had gotten used to, the inflamed joints and the deep ache of weakened bones, was also gone. It was like someone had flipped a switch in me, and suddenly I was exactly like I'd been before. This may seem like a small thing, but when you've lived with the pain, made it a day-to-day part of your life, its absence is like a physical loss. It was like a kid who's had his tooth pulled, his tongue prodding at the vacancy where something solid had been before. When he spoke, I had to shake myself back to reality to ask him to repeat himself. "We will see you in 2 weeks for your next treatment. The nurse will give you a prescription when you leave. Take it twice a day in order to keep your body from rejecting the treatment. Understand?" I nodded, still a little dazed, and agreed to take the pills. I made another appointment with the similarly pretty brunette and took the nondescript little bag she handed me. She smiled, saying they would see me in 2 weeks, and I headed home. As I drove home, I expected the pain to rear its head again with every press of a pedal or turn of the wheel. The pain had become like a swarm of gnats, ever present and buzzing. You never got used to it, but you became accustomed to it. It's never comfortable, but you look forward to the times when it isn't there. Now, it was just gone. I was driving with nary a pain or a wince, something I hadn't done in years. I should have been happy, but I kept waiting for it to disappear. Maybe that made me a pessimist, but I don't care. When you live like this long enough, you constantly wait for the other shoe to drop. I walked into my house, my bones still feeling like nothing so much as normal bones, and took the pills out of the bag. Reading over the label for side effects or warnings, I found nothing but the instructions on the outside. No name, no ingredients, no warnings, just 8 words in bold font. Take 1 pill, with food, twice a day. I opened the bottle and let a few of the pills roll onto my palm. They were white and blue gel capsules, the contents looking like nothing so much as the sugar on top of the snow caps my husband ate at the movies. As they sat in my hand, I noticed that they were oddly cold to the touch, and the feeling reminded me of the way the liquid had felt as it entered my IV. When they didn't immediately appear dangerous or try to bite me, I let them tumble back into the bottle and closed the lid. I set a reminder on my phone for 7 a.m. and started fixing dinner. When I went to bed that night, I had already forgotten about them, but as I pulled the blankets up around myself, I felt a sudden chill arrow through me. It should have raised a sort of red flag, but I was still riding the high of moving about my home without any of the pain from earlier that day. A few hours later, though, I was awoken by an icy chill going through my body, followed by an intense ache in my joints. As I tried to get up, I felt every bone in my body tighten. It was almost impossible to walk, but after a few minutes, it eased up, and I was able to make it to the bathroom. I figured this was just a side effect of the stiffness the doctor was talking about. And after a warm bath, some of the pain had abated. With some of my mobility returned, I shuffled back to bed, hoping to sleep off the pain until it was time for my first dose of medication. The next day, the pain of the night before was a fleeting memory, and I took my first pill and started getting ready for my day. It usually took me several hours to get my legs to cooperate enough to make breakfast, but today I moved about my kitchen the way I hadn't in years. My joints felt fluid, my bones were as forgettable as they should be, and when I woke my husband up for work at 10, he looked at me a little shocked to find breakfast already on the table, and the kitchen dishes cleaned and put away. "Wow, those treatments really did the trick," he said, taking my hands in his big calloused ones, intent on kissing them. He dropped them in surprise as a shudder ran through him. "Geez, babe, your hands are so cold." There was worry on his face, but I waved his worries away and told him it was nothing. "It's just a side effect of the treatment. I'm fine, sweetie." Deep down, though, I was worried. I should have called the doctor's office right then and there and told them about the side effects. After the weirdness that had happened the night before, I should have been more concerned, but it all comes back to one thing. Despite the stiffness, despite the cold hands, despite the next 2 weeks where sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night and hobbled into a warm bath, the intense pain in my bones was all but a distant memory. I would have given anything to be done with the pain like that, and it turned out the cost was more than I could have known. 2 weeks later, I arrived at my next appointment. I was curious to see if it hurt the same way it had the time before, but my reasons for going were twofold. I had taken the last of my pills that morning, and I knew that I would need more if I wanted to maintain this lack of joint pain. So I smiled at the nurse, let them strap me down again, let them slide the needle into my arm, and breathed in the gas like the good doctor told me to. The treatment was performed the same as the first, but I gritted my teeth through the pain as I waited for him to inject my IV with that sweet icy liquid as the gas did its work. As the straps slid off, I nodded through the closing instructions and shuffled up to the desk to make my appointment and get my pills. I moved as if in a dream, my body feeling strangely heavy as I climbed into my car and drove home. I jerked awake in my driveway, unsure how I had arrived home. I had never fallen asleep at the wheel, much less sleep drove home, and the thought made me shiver. I grabbed my prescription and headed inside, wanting to get as far from the vehicle as possible at that moment. I thought about starting dinner as I trudged in, but decided to take a nap instead. It was early still, only mid-afternoon, but I was suddenly exhausted. I could barely keep my eyes open, and as I slid into bed, wearing the same clothes I'd left the house in, I thought I was settling in for nothing but a couple hours of rest. 10 hours later, I shuddered awake into total darkness as an arctic chill shot through my nerve endings. It was worse than it had ever been, worse than any time before it, and as I tried to climb out of bed, my legs froze up and sent me spilling to the floor. I lay there, unable to bend my legs or arms, only able to pull them towards me like palsied claws. I was overjoyed when I heard my husband's soft snores from the bed beside me. He would help me. He would get me to the hospital. He could get me into a warm bath, and I opened my mouth to scream his name. My lips trembled as I prepared to cry out for him, but no sound escaped my chilly maw. I gasped weakly, his name lost amongst the short barks of sound, while he slept peacefully a few feet away. I lay there with tears of fear dripping down my face, certain that he would wake up the next morning to find me dead. I almost expected to see them freeze against my cheeks, but they did little more than pool beneath my head and wet the side of my face. I spent that night drifting in and out of my new painful existence. It felt like I lay there for weeks, listening to the content snores of my spouse as my body was racked with freezing chills. I thought I would die again and again, and as the sun began to rise, I almost wished for it. The colder I became, the less the shivers seemed to blow through me. I still felt them, but my body had stopped responding. I was powerless to move, incapable of doing much besides watching the sunrise and the day begin. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because when my husband yelled my name, my eyes were startled open. What the hell is this? But he seemed to lose his words as he stood over me. I mouthed at him, asking him to help me, but he looked unsure. I don't know how. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but instead he turned to my vanity and fetched a small hand mirror. I looked back at myself, not sure it was me for a moment. I was looking at a perfect china doll as she lay curled up on the floor. Her skin was a perfect alabaster, broken only by the slight spider cracks that ran through it. As I watched, another chill coursed through me, and I saw the cracks lengthen as my fragile form tried to shiver. I wanted to cry, but I had no tears left. Instead, I told him to put the phone next to me and put it on text-to-speech. I wanted him to understand, wanted to explain how this had happened, while I could still explain anything. He did as I asked, saying he would go get help, but I don't think he'll be back in time. It took a surprisingly short time to lay it all out, but I can feel the change beginning to affect my face now. My blinks are becoming slower and slower, and my throat's beginning to tighten as it stiffens like my skin. My lips have started to flake as I speak, the cracks in my arms likely running through the lips my husband loved to kiss. I'll be nothing but a beautiful statue soon, a curiosity piece for people to speculate over. But with the time I have left, I want people to understand how I came to this point. I don't know if it was the treatment or the pills, maybe it was both, but it doesn't appear to be ready for human trials. If they ask you to sign your life away as I did, make sure you know what you're agreeing to. The short respite from pain wasn't worth the hell I found myself in now. It's getting hard to breathe now. My lungs are laboring to pull in breath, and I can feel the same shivering running through them with every gasping pull. My eyes are fixed forward, my fingers forever locked together, and I feel that every word may be my last. If you make it home, Jason, know that I love you, and I'm sorry that this is where we must part. I think that'll just about do it for today, though I do hope we'll see you back tomorrow for more cozy horror with me, Dr. Plague. Till then, have a wonderful day and a spooky evening.